We would like to welcome today author and activist and influencer in terms of our global scene and thought provoker, Daniel Pinchbeck, who I had met years ago at a book reading for his book that was about 2012, and was
That was that was decades ago, not years ago.
sorry, but
That was
it feels like it was yesterday. And have been his friend on Facebook. He did an interview for us about the COVID, Wuhan kind of lab theory stuff during a difficult time in our nation for COVID. And just want to say thank you so much to Daniel because he deeply cares about the planet and I think has a deep care for consciousness as we look to be an intelligent species, hopefully. So I'm just going to jump right in, Daniel. I follow you on Facebook, and I think some folks might say, this is a guy who thinks that we're all going to die within 10 years. You had commented on how the Arctic melt as far as the icebergs melting, ice sheets in Antarctica melting, that you really saw for us about 10 years before we have a global environmental collapse. And as I'm researching, some of your posts and things like that, and thinking about how folks are not awake, it seems to me like you are a unique individual and that you have friends, I believe, like I know Russell Brand has been your friend in the past and so forth, but like you have friends that are extremely pro RFK Jr., very anti-vaccine, that kind of thing. But you also have friends that are pro-vaccine and think that the Trump crowd is kind of playing us all and as a bunch of fascists. So I'm just curious if someone is reading your stuff, or do you think, are we doomed? And can you extrapolate on where you're at with all that?
sure. Yeah, I mean, I sometimes use Facebook as an experimental medium to share, all sorts of ideas. I mean, I use Substack for that too, but sometimes it's a slightly different approach with the Facebook posts. And yeah, I mean, that day when I wrote that, I was like, yeah, man, I really think this is looking really bad. And I just wanted to share, what I could see as the worst possible outcomes. In my heart, of course, I hope that that's not the case. And, there's a range of perspectives. We do seem to be piling on existential risks right now, including, the risk of nuclear war, the risk of AI sort of going berserk, and a kind of more rapid climate catastrophe, which would trigger kind of the mechanism for us to go extinct through an ecological breakdown would be a loss of oxygen because the plankton in the oceans, I think, produce like 60% of the oxygen. And as the oceans become warmer and more acidic, the plankton stop to reproduce as much. And we also have the methane problem. So there's a huge amount of stored methane in Arctic ice and the Siberian peat bogs. And as the warming starts, it doesn't look like it just goes incrementally. Ultimately, it goes kind of exponential, and all of that methane gets released. Now, methane, like CO2, lingers in the atmosphere for a century. Methane only stays in the atmosphere for 10 years, but methane is like 30 times more potent as a heat trapping gas than CO2. So if you look at the past extinction records, when do species go extinct? Like a meteorite, hits the earth or the volcanoes erupt. And then there's a very quick period where like a lot of species disappear. And that seems to be when a mass methane release is triggered and all the methane shoots up from the ice. So yeah, it does sort of seem, well, it's actually been very cold recently. And as we're, little human animal mammals, as we walk around, if it's cold, we're like, oh, no problem. If it's warm, we're like, oh, sunny day. We're not, although we have the capacity for, foresight and wisdom, we tend to look at things in a very animal way. Like that's our, natural set point. So yeah, recently it's been cold in New York, but the long-term, trends suggest that warming is getting, rapidly worse, and then it's more of like a curve that goes like this rather than just like a curve, thing that goes like this. So that's my concern about that. But and sometimes I write those things as provocations to see what other people say. I mean, If we did have a collective sense that we're approaching the end, on the one hand, that could trigger a lot of irresponsible behavior, but it could also trigger like a lot of like, spiritual oomph, like reflective, self-reflection, even celebration, for the entire experience we've gotten to have. Who the hell knows? But I try to be, relatively truthful to my own experience. That's why I brought that up. What was the other piece of your question? I can't remember now.
It was kind of about how any of your RFK, pro RFK supporter followers or friends may be the Trumper crowd, basically, who have kind of bought into the RFK dream. It seemed to me that you were pouring a little bit of your own special dose of reality on their dreams in terms of, I saw it as you kind of saying you're being played by the fascists, you know?
Yeah, I mean that's what I think. I mean I think unfortunately the people who have taken power are kind of like psychologically broken, narcissists, addict personalities, megalomaniacs, psychopaths. I think, RFK falls into some of those categories. I really gave him a big benefit of the doubt because I interviewed him. And I was very surprised by, because I was just asking him some simple journalistic questions, how incredibly defensive he was. It's like I wasn't completely supporting him. He immediately got into this like negative mode. And then when I found out that not only does he think that the COVID vaccines were, a mistake, he apparently thinks that things like the polio and the smallpox and the measles vaccines are mistakes, as we're now seeing that playing out. So it's this weird. I was, I mean, this weird, very extreme libertarian ideology where, like, you know, everybody's autonomy is their own business, and we don't really have any responsibility for anybody else or each other, and we should just do what we feel is right, which like really goes against the whole evolution of modern society, right? Where we're like realize that yeah, like disease vectors spread across populations, infectious diseases are really dangerous. Like sometimes we, each of us should take a little bit of a sacrifice to, support the health of the collective, whether that's taxes or whether that's a vaccine. So this whole ideology that just sees like the sovereign individual, which is a book that Peter Thiel and Mark Andreessen always cite, as like the ultimate good. And so now it's like we're putting that ideology into practice. It's sort of like a weird combination of the sort of hyper libertarian sovereign individual ideology. Like if you read that book, it was a 1997 book by two conservative libertarians. They argue that the nation state is inherently going to collapse due to information technology, and the future will be what they call commercialized sovereignty. So, or in which Balaji Srinivasan, I guess, has expanded the sort of network state ideology, or Curtis Yarvin talks about as the patchwork state. So instead of there being a nation state that protects the people, there'll be like paid commercial kind of like enclaves where you can buy a limited amount of protection if you have the money to do so. So there's that ideology on the one hand, which is really, I think, powering a lot of what we're seeing. And then on the other hand, there's also more like a Christian theocracy, Nazi fascist ideology, which actually wants centralized control over like data and borders and so on. So yeah, it's like a weird schizophrenia right now of those two horrible ideologies kind of like coming to converging.
It's interesting because I have friends that have met with RFK Jr. and have supported him quite a bit, and friends that believe like the U.S. dollar is going to crash and that there's going to be like a new currency or something. But concepts around Bitcoin and romanticizing what they think of maybe Donald Trump as being their hero with like a new currency and may not even realize this is me hypothesizing that it could be that there's really not that much difference that we're going to end up in some kind of even recently it seemed like Trump was manipulating the market. I'm not sure if you pay attention
Of
to
course.
yeah, and it seems to me
I mean,
like
recently, that was like yesterday.
yeah. I'm just saying as far as digital currency goes, it could be I think unflattering to those of us who think that we're so smart that we have outthunk the system or something to realize that we've been played by the system and a digital currency is going to happen through Trump or who knows.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that um, digital currencies ultimately are parasitic on the traditional economy because they don't make anything in themselves. They don't have any intrinsic value. So, I mean, people say there's no difference between Bitcoin and the US dollar, but that's completely stupid because Bitcoin is, a mathematical numerical system that we've ascribed value to. I mean, anybody could, if you had enough technical chops, you could fork Bitcoin or make your own Bitcoin. Whereas a national currency like the US dollar is actually linked to, hundreds of years of, legal developments, natural resources, cities that have been built up where many people live, and also, military protection and all that kind of stuff. So there is a tangible reason, innovation, how the country, protects or handles like, business innovation, taxation, all that stuff. So there's reasons that national currency has value. It's not just based on nothing, as Bitcoin enthusiasts like to say. Whereas Bitcoin is literally based on nothing. It's just a mathematical structure that they're like, a friend of mine calls them like, digital numerical trading cards. Yeah, you know, I mean, there obviously there's some utility for Bitcoin, and it doesn't look like it's going to go away very soon. But I'm more concerned about the impacts that crypto will have. And for me, what looks like it's happened, we saw Trump with the Trump coin, where he made, millions of dollars, billions of dollars, or whatever, really quickly. Um, Crypto is perfect for scammers and for pump and dump kind of schemes. And Trump's whole history is a bankruptcies, pump and dump schemes. Find the next person to hold the bag while you go on to the next thing. And all the people he's surrounded himself with, share that ideology more or less. So, they're removing all of the financial protections, fraud protections, and so on. So it seems, and this is what I've been writing in recent pieces, that there's kind of yeah, plan, I guess, uh, implicit, fully conscious or relatively conscious, where basically, if you crash the U.S. economy, crash the dollar, create a global depression, all these people who are part of like the transnational oligarchic elite, yeah, they will also be hurt. They will lose. If you're worth 100 billion, you'll lose 10 billion or 20 billion. But if all of the resources in the U.S., businesses crash, so something that might have cost 10 million costs you suddenly 100,000, or the U.S. government goes into receivership because we can't pay back our debts, so the private lands have to be sold, through creditors like Yosemite. So suddenly the sovereign Saudi wealth fund can buy Yosemite and turn it into a golf course. This is the same thing that we actually organized in the former Soviet Union. With if you read Naomi Klein's The Shock Doctrine, we basically forced them to privatize all of their public and state-owned assets. So, so that seems to be the plan here, and so that's why Trump and his people are so unconcerned about the enormous damage they're inflicting on everybody through these kind of like willy-nilly and rapid and turbulent kind of things they're doing.
No, it's interesting as we see the stock market kind of go up and down. I feel intuitively like they're going to play this game for a while, but then I think ultimately like the worst case scenario of what you just described as far as like us being the Soviet Union and selling everything off and the dollar crashing and all that I think ultimately I mean, do you feel a bit sorry for your friends that maybe are Trump supporters that don't realize that maybe the dollar could be deliberately crashed in the future or something like that?
I mean, I don't know if I have a lot of friends anymore who are Trump supporters. Well, I guess I have a couple. I mean, I can't feel sorry for anybody who is a Trump supporter because, he expressed exactly what he was going to do. And, several months before the election, I started writing continuously about like, how bad this was going to be. If you read Project 2025, if you looked at, major MAGA supporters like Jack Posobiec, who wrote a book called Unhuman, where he said that, leftists, socialists, and even liberal Democrats are not actually human, and they don't actually need to be treated as humans. And he also said that what the U.S. needed was what Franco and Pinochet did in Spain and Argentina, and he praised Pinochet's helicopter killings, where they took dissidents up into helicopters, just threw them out, or political opponents or whatever. So, at that point, I realized that this thing, and Posobiec has been traveling. He went to Munich with J.D. Vance. He's like and J.D. Vance actually blurbed his book on humans and said, this is great. This is the right plan for America. So. These are people who, yeah, they just want power. J.D. Vance was put into this position by Peter Thiel. He's kind of like the bridge between, Christian fanatics and, tech bros or the tech philosophy. So yeah, anybody who voted for Trump, unfortunately, kind of deserves what they're going to get, and everybody else is just fucked basically by the situation. You know.
It's interesting because I lead a bipartisan political effort, I try to connect with conservatives. And when I watch Candace Owens, I'm not sure if you've watched Candace Owens, but her show is growing quite exponentially, right? But it's a lot of that Christian, like let's make us a Christian nation again kind of stuff, that you were talking about, that there's like a wave of almost like Nazi Christianity, as far as it's our way or the highway. Like there's no room for other religions here. Do you know what I mean? Like it needs to be a Christian nation again. And so it seems to me it's kind of like things that are negative for us as a nation are being cloaked within these values of Christianity. I just got back from Texas, so I feel like I really saw it up close.
Mm.
And just wondering, do you have like Christian friend? Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a weird, form. Well, I guess it's not weird in a way. Like if you look at the whole history of Europe and the US, I mean, the sort of banner of this sort of Christendom, Christian civilization was the, reason that we felt we could, commit genocide against native people or just enslave them or whatever, because we had this great, religion. But of course, it's always ironic, when you go back to the teachings of, Christ and the gospel, and it just turns out that, he wasn't really talking about building a large military and security apparatus and using it to like oppress people or, enslaving people or whatever. So it's kind of weird that, that's just the way it is. But yeah, so I mean, I think that there's a desperation to, find meaning and values at this point, and, there is some truth to, with C.J. Hopkins, I guess, talked about how the liberal society is kind of has a tendency to decode all values, and that did reach a kind of extreme with like the gender stuff with Judith Butler and the trans stuff, where like, there's no inherent kind of identity, no inherent value to anything, in a nihilist and materialist framework, which we've had, since the 19th century. And that's why for me, yeah, there is, kind of the necessity of answering the call of the meaning crisis. And I think that, what I talk about as monistic or analytic idealism is a very successful way to do that. Although the problem is it's a little bit abstract and intellectual for most people. But essentially, the argument is that, consciousness is the foundational layer. And Bernardo Kastrup is one of the really great thinkers, contemporary thinkers, along with Douglas Hoffman, Amit Goswami, and Neil Teese, who've been basically now arguing for idealism, and that allows for things like psychic phenomena, even like potentially reincarnation, subtle bodies, some aspect of our self that exists, beyond this life, and so on. But it removes the Christian veneer. So that to me is a more accurate way to respond to the meaning crisis. But I don't know how to convey that to a mass audience at this point who are sort of locked into this like reductive ideology.
so the meaning crisis is reflected in these, largely like liberal groups that don't necessarily have the traipsings of Christianity or religion to hang their hat on. What you're saying is they don't necessarily have a God or an awareness of something as strong that would kind of counter some of those effects.
Yeah, that on the one hand. On the other hand, I would say that a lot of this Christian revivalism is a response to the meaning crisis. I mean, a lot of, people who are now turning from secular liberalism, looking for something
Right,
to believe in or have
right,
faith in.
right.
And yeah, like, Christian fundamentalist movements are also like inherently postmodern
Hmm.
phenomena.
Hmm.
They're not what those things were in the past. They're sort of
Hmm.
like, post-technological, postmodern sort of reconstructions of a kind of former imagined purity, and then that, imposed on people, like Handmaid's Tale style,
Yep. No, I get it. So as far as the psychedelic renaissance, I see a lot of I've been leading in the psychedelic movement for about 5 years now. And, I find the crowd somewhat problematic. Like I've worked with MAPS, I've worked with David Bronner, I've worked with Mason Marks, who has the Psychedelic Law Center at Harvard. And where I find kind of the crowd problematic is that I kind of relate it to the kids in high school that are always giving their finger to the principal and they want to be their own individual and they don't want to listen. And so I don't find it the easiest crowd to lead because it's a lot of people that kind of want to be their own individuals and so forth. And yet at the same time, I find a lot of groupthink that doesn't really appeal to me, like stuff that I've just found problematic or obnoxious or ignorant as far as cancel culture and things like that. I had someone recently make a video about me that they animated, all based on false assertions. And I'm sure you've dealt with criticism, being a public figure. So it's somewhat new to me, to get kind of like hate videos made, if you will. But I'm trying to, better understand, where is the psychedelic community at? Do I want to lead in the psychedelic community? Where do I want to take it? You're talking about this loss of meaning in our culture, or people grappling with looking for, easy meaning, maybe compartmentalized McDonald's meaning or something. I don't know if I have that to offer. But I'm just wondering what you think about the psychedelic community. I mean, you kind of waded in and out as far as being a figure in the community or having influence there and have written your book as far as like sacred medicine and delving into all that. Um, Maybe you just see it as a reflection of the larger culture, or do you kind of see it as a subset, kind of going through its own cultural growing pains?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I really, did help, start the modern psychedelic renaissance. Because when I wrote my first book, Breaking Open the Head on psychedelic shamanism, was in 2002. And it
Right.
was the first book to come out from like a big publisher in decades. The first book to get reviewed in the New York Times and taken seriously intellectually, and inspired a lot of people to try ayahuasca, to go to Burning Man, and so on. Um, yeah, then I wrote a second book, 2012, The Return of Quetzalcoatl. But I always was like very different, fascinated by the occult, psychic, paranormal, supernatural aspects of the experiences, as well as the mystical and transcendent. I didn't really, I wasn't really looking at this sort of psychological, psychiatrical model so much. Wasn't my thing, and that began to predominate. And then also I had to kind of fall from grace at some point around like my own like Me Too mistakes, and I tried to make a public statement and ask for forgiveness, but that ended up in that period of cancel culture and me just getting totally ostracized and cast out. I'm still not invited back into the psychedelic circles or whatever. So that's sort of sad for me, but so that may have also tainted my perspective, but my perspective is in retrospect, because when I wrote Breaking Open the Head, I was really looking at, ayahuasca, and iboga and so on, and mushrooms, in relationship to the, planetary ecological crisis, and with the hope that these could spur like a new vision for humanity and a new path. And because we are in such a hyper individual, hyper consumer society, I felt that, over time, the construct that was put around these substances by like Horizons and Maps, it was like, the focus first of all, just how do we get this into the mainstream? We have to get these approved and back into the, through the legislative process, so we have to like shear them of everything that's like weird or like visionary or like psychic or and then like find the data that says, oh, these can do good for this condition based on that or whatever. But it was kind of like throwing out the baby with the bathwater, I think. And I think what we're now, what I guess what I would say is like, and it's a little bit of a complicated statement. Let me see if I can unpack it. In indigenous cultures, when they used these tools as initiatory instruments, it wasn't like the individual would just take them and, that would be it. There would be a process of guiding them through an experience, which I mean, I had a few, like in Africa, I went through the Bwiti initiation. And then after that, the elders of the community would be like, okay, you have to tell us all your visions, and some of those visions are important for the future of the community, and also some of them may give us an insight into how you fit into the community, what your role is. Are you a shaman? Are you a dancer? Are you a warrior? Are you a farmer? Whatever, if they had farmers. So the point is that without a cultural construct, the initiation can often be useless because somebody goes through it, and if all their options are, oh, I either become a, lifestyle coach and, or, you know, go back into, day trading or something. Like I remember seeing these sort of like ketamine ads on Instagram where this like day trader was like, yeah, I was like really depressed about my job and I couldn't take it anymore. Then I did ketamine and I was fine. I felt really good about it. I wasn't depressed anymore. I could do my trading, So people who are like literally working on the sort of, financialization and the destruction of the world based on all they can do to acquire personal gain and so on, instead of the initiation being kind of shepherded in a way where people are like, oh, like now that I've had, that experience, here are these people who are helping me recontextualize what I mean and how I relate to the planet and how I use my intellect and my resources and my skills to make the world better. That instead of just being focused on, narrow therapy goals, like individual therapy goals, or entrepreneurial goals, like microdosing for self-optimization, and sort of to further the sort of individuation process, the entrepreneurial cult of the self. So now you see all these like lifestyle coaches, and if you go to their websites, it's like they almost like, with the ones with the big Tulum hats or whatever. Then you go to the website, it's like so and so, sat with the Kogi and photo of him, and then he, worked closely with the Shuar. Then a photo of him drinking, ayahuasca or whatever. It's like it almost becomes part of your resume, in this sort of new weird culture that you have to prove that you went through that. But yeah, it's become very surface level. So the problem was like, and I don't see any way to correct this, but what should happen or should have happened, or I don't like the word should, but I feel there needed to be more of a ideological or philosophical or mythological maybe construct around these experiences so that you go through them, and then on the other side it's not just libertarian entrepreneurial capitalism. It's like, okay, like you've now seen the sort of sacred interdependence of reality and how we're all one and consciousness is one. Here are the ways you could use your genius and your skills and your creativity and your heart to create that kind of society that we all know we needed to have. So yeah, I feel like it's been like now it's like a chicken with its head cut off. So now you have like libertarians like Elon Musk's buddy, whatever his name is, Garcia, taking over Lycos and so on. So but I don't know how you would have made that shift. I mean, it's something I could write about again, but nobody listens to me anymore anyway, so it doesn't really matter.
Um, so I had written, you may not see yourself as a mentor, but I often find you a misunderstood spokesperson for humanity and the planet. Um, and I guess we already kind of touched on this, but in terms of feeling misunderstood, and I've felt that in the political space, I had already asked about this a bit, but thoughts on cancel culture, the takedown of individuals in the spotlight, and what you see as being behind that. And I guess where I was going with that question is, sometimes I believe that there are agent provocateurs that are in the psychedelic movement. Like maybe out of 400 volunteers, I've had like five people that seem to be there to create chaos. And I don't know if you ever thought that you were on a list or being deliberately targeted in any way, um, because maybe your ideas are challenging or thought-provoking or challenge the status quo.
Yeah, it's possible. I have no idea. I mean, definitely on Facebook, I felt like a lot of, kind of like bot attacks or like that kind of stuff. But um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've kind of accepted that there's something about me that attracts kind of certain level of hostility. And Yeah, but I think in retrospect, I mean, yeah, there was a kind of, Stalinist or Leninist ideology on the left, this kind of puritanical, purity tests. And That's turned out to be a total disaster because it really just opened a huge opportunity for the right wing. And when yeah when and A lot of the powerful men who got canceled or ruined or cast out as a result of Me Too were liberal, progressive, left leaning, and you know it, because they had a few sexual indiscretions or they slept with an intern or they acted poorly in some situation, and there was no opportunity for people to be like, hey, like, I was human, I made a mistake. And if you tried to do that, you would just get even more attacked. So men have been put in a horrible situation where, like, yeah, they can't speak about their own experience. So they just are become this sort of like projection screen for anger and hatred from women in particular. And yes, and I'm not arguing, of course, that there wasn't a lot of terrible behavior in the past, but when it's like yeah, I mean, I've argued a few times that we could have used something like a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I know there have been some efforts to do that, but it's also extremely difficult because we don't live in a tribe. We live in these, like, cosmopolitan, heterogeneous societies. Who constitutes your community? Like, people were like, you should do something with the psychedelic community, and they should, but I was like, well, what is the psychedelic community? Who constitutes my community? I mean, so yeah, these things are kind of insoluble at this point. But I mean, I think hopefully, but yeah, I mean, it's like, Russell Brand is an example, or like Louis C.K., or Al Franken. There's like endless list of these guys, who had, like, liberal sensibilities. Some were more left, some were more mainstream, but by casting all these people out into the wilderness, you actually created a situation where it allowed for right-wing men to flourish and to take more and more cultural prominence without there being anything on the other side, which is kind of where we're at now. Because on the right, you're actually rewarded. Like Andrew Tate just got flown back to America in Florida. Like, if you're kind of like um, you know kind of displaying kind of a
Openly,
predatory.
yeah, openly misogynistic or
Yeah,
whatever.
exactly, exactly. They see that as a positive because they see that this is what Steve Bannon recognized a while back. The sort of young, disaffected men were the perfect breeding ground for the right. Now, years ago, when I was building the Evolver network back in like 2009, 10, I already recognized that this was a huge issue. And we were trying to build a, community-based model of local community groups organizing really fun and exciting meetups to, share, new alternative culture paradigms ranging from permaculture to local currencies to ecstatic dance to tantra and polyamory to, psychedelics and lucid dreaming and so on. So the idea is that, we understood that there was a cultural vacuum in the US. And so if you're living in like the South and like places that are not only like food deserts, but they're also like cultural deserts. So if the only thing that has any energy is like neo-Nazi skinhead culture, that's what you're going to gravitate to. So, so you had the cultural elites, like the wealthy coastal elites, creating Burning Man and rediscovering psychedelia, but there really wasn't much of an effort to share, that, new kind of vision with people who are poorer or people in like these other communities and so on. So it became more and more elitist. And meanwhile, like very smug liberal democratic kind of establishment bullshit. So like, like wanting more automation, great. But then, 3 million, the biggest job force in the US are truck drivers, 3 million jobs. People, one of the only good jobs you can get if you don't have a, college degree or whatever. So like we're saying, oh, we're gonna like get, we're gonna have self-driving cars and trucks. Aren't you excited? And these people are like, fuck you. Like, you've already destroyed the factories. Now you're gonna take away my livelihood. So all these people gravitated to the right wing, which gave them like false promises after they felt over and over again that the hope that they'd invested in the Democrats was betrayed. And yeah, so like, you had like Burning Man, the Summit series, like there were this sort of cognoscenti that could have really had an awakening and helped the situation. This was what I was desperately trying to marshal or organize for years, but it turned in the wrong direction. And that was like, one of the many things that was like the death knell of this whole situation.
So, how do you keep your spirits up when you see the desire within yourself or others to maybe kind of create a Burning Man movement that's based on taking all that time and energy and going into areas and maybe helping to build, housing for poor people or doing something that, feels more like giving back? In whatever regard you're talking, if you, tried for so long with organizing and then have taken steps back at certain periods, you know what I mean, to do self-care or whatever, um, how do you encourage yourself? Like, do you find any kind of faith in religion or astrology or aliens, or is there anything that gives you hope as far as, you know, creating a movement to, you talked about a meaning movement and so forth.
Yeah. Sure. Well, like on a personal level, I'm actually quite like relatively peaceful and happy at this stage in my life, just because I've gone through a lot and I'm like 58 or whatever. But and and as I said, I'm a monistic idealist. I've had so many experiences of synchronicity and profound
No,
transcendence.
I love your interest in psychic stuff as far as psychedelics go. So,
Yeah. Um, so yeah, I mean, I'm obviously very concerned about, my daughter's future and, other children or whatever. But I mean, um, so yeah, like, I'm annoyed right now that I have to focus so much on the Trump stuff and the Musk stuff because I would really like to explore art, consciousness, creativity, and I feel kind of like, um, drawn into like trying to help people parse this whole situation with the hope that some kind of movement could start in time, although it doesn't look very promising. um so yeah, but I'm happy in myself at this point. Like I went through a lot and I feel like calm and you know so, and then I just do what I can. I'm kind of like surrendered. Like, I think, high probability, we're gonna see things go to shit, like really to shit, like in a way like we've never seen before.
and are you talking about like just a political like depression or war as far
Yeah, but
as like,
I think it's quite likely, it's not likely, but it's possible that we could even see like concentration camps and like
yep,
death camps here.
yep,
As the ecology collapses, and as this sort of like super wealthy group, continues to try to amass whatever's left for themselves,
right,
building sort of like walled cities or walled
right,
castles or
right,
whatever.
smart.
So. But within that, there will still be beauty, up to the last second, like flowers will still grow, on the prison balconies or whatever. I don't know. I mean, it is what it is. Like for whatever reason, this is the spectacle that we as an integral element of a unified field of consciousness have decided to bring into manifestation, in this collective dream that we call reality. And yeah, it's so. I mean, for me, it's like still underlying that is like the great joy of the void and whatever else, and it's just like on with the show. Yeah.
So Rizwan Virk, I don't know if you've read any of his books, but he talks about the simulation theory quite a bit. And
What's the name?
Rizwan Virk, he's written several books connecting the simulation theory with Hinduism. But really interesting guy, has been on Joe Rogan. But anyway, he basically says that we're almost at this point of realizing, kind of collectively that we are in a simulation. And I'm just wondering if you've given any thought to the simulation theory as far as does it matter to you or do you?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I mean, I guess for me the simulation approach is like yeah, kind of like a more technologically kind of minded way of talking about some of the deep truths that you find in like, Buddhism and Hinduism, which is what I was saying, like, consciousness is the underlying reality. This is like a dream. The world that we're, the universe is like a dream that consciousness is having.
Yes.
I think that the simulation thing, yeah, it creates a little bit of a technological and framing, which bothers me a little bit because I mean, Yeah, you could have an aesthetic or poetic in framing or mythological framing instead. But yeah, I mean, I get it. I mean, I think that it can lead people though, like, Elon Musk is a proponent of simulation theory. So it can lead to a kind of, narcissist, almost like nihilist sense of your own like agency, like you're the player of the computer game.
Right,
You're Ready Player One and everybody
right,
else is an NPC, which just
right.
seems like
I don't
we're a
know
lot.
if you Elon got busted for saying he was like one of the top players, like in the
Oh
top
yeah, yeah, of course.
three.
Yeah,
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 yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I read about that. Yeah. Yeah.
Right, which is just such a strange little ego thing to even care about. So
Yeah, he's obviously a very twisted person at this point. Like he's very sad. It's um yeah,
it's interesting that conservatives may think he's a great guy, but he doesn't really embody these values of family and all that supposedly conservatives, you know what I mean? There's such kind of a disconnect, I think, between who our heroes are. If you're embodying like conservative values and Elon doesn't, it just it's
yeah, most of them don't though. I mean, Pete Hegseth and all that stuff.
right.
Um um yeah, I mean
I
yeah, I
do
mean
I do find it interesting. So astrology wise and alien wise, is there anything that stands out to you? Like you think that disclosure is going to happen any day, and could that change anything? Or
yeah, I mean I think it's more I think it's more like an inherently demonic or tricksterish process. So I
okay,
kind of support the ideas from Patrick Harper, who wrote The Philosopher's Secret Fire. That's a really important book, I think. Or yeah, so it's like there's something about it that inherently stays at the edge. You know, it's like the other plays with us, taunts us
yep,
through history, but never. It seems like it's going to come and get closer, then it like recedes again.
right.
Um, yeah, mm, I mean, I guess on my better days, since you read the 2012 book, I wrote a lot about like Gene Gebser and this idea that, maybe we're actually going through this sort of evolution to a different structure of consciousness, which is a different way of relating to time and space and a different approach to knowledge and so on. And, that's kind of what I try to express or approach in a lot of my work and my writing. So, yeah, we would probably get to a different way of understanding all these things, a little bit less kind of like everything is very literalized and dualistic. Our language kind of reinforces that. Whereas yeah, even the idea of there being a literal reality is just a way of looking at things. Like if it's ultimately consciousness, creating, this experience, then it's a little bit different than that, you know. And some indigenous languages like Hopi language or something seem like they have a more precise or better kind of phenomenology than we have in our Western language, where we sort of get constantly trapped in these restrictive like dichotomies or dualisms or something like that. You know.
So it sounds like you're a little bit like open to the concept of alien stuff, but at the same time, you're saying it could be just kind of like another piece of information or input from the universe, but it's not necessarily your vibe is that this is not a mainstream thing. This is something that is going to be flirting with our consciousness for a while, in and out.
I mean, I did write a lot in 2012. I wrote a lot about the crop circles,
Uh-huh. I
and
remember.
what's that?
I remember.
Yeah, and so spending a bunch of time over there and studying the whole phenomenon, interviewing all these people. Yeah, I think there's an interactivity happening with another level of sort of cosmic consciousness, which might also just be us at a higher level of development or a higher
Totally.
dimension or something.
Totally.
You know, so yeah, I mean, I don't see why there wouldn't be all sorts of other, consciousnesses in the universe. But I think that, yeah, we just tend to get a little literal around it. Uh, yeah, I'm not doing my best job of explaining that today,
That's
but
fine. There's a guy, and you might find him too, I don't know, problematic. It's a Bitcoin enthusiast guy, but he was featured in Newsweek. They kind of discounted him. I just think he's a fascinating character. His name is Cliff High, And he developed an AI oracle where he runs these programs where he kind of, as a sieve or something, he goes through all of the information on the internet, for even the dark net, for everything that people are talking about, because he says that language precludes like reality and you can tell where things are going. So he kind of comes up with like three different timelines, and based upon these kind of like cosmic markers, like if something happens, then he knows what timeline we're going to be on. But he comes to that conclusion by sifting through all what people are talking about, what humans are talking about. And back in like 1991 or something, and I could have the date wrong, he had made the accurate prediction that Joe Rogan and Donald Trump were going to be interviewed on Joe Rogan's show together or something. So he predicted it like decades before it happened, but he also said that there was going to be objects in the sky. And I don't know if you remember, stuff was happening in New Jersey with drones and orbs and things like that. So he said that would happen a month after, which it pretty much did. And that's why Newsweek featured him about this AI oracle. So in his current trajectory, which I just find fascinating as just like another piece of information, I'm not hooked on him or anything, but he said that unless disclosure happens like this year, then next year is kind of like the fall of humanity and 90% of us die or whatever. And so who knows? But I just find him kind of interesting, and he's part of that woo-woo crowd, like Jean-Claude Van Damme. I don't know if Mystic, like they have a Mystic channel and so forth. And I kind of wanted to ask you about astrology before we finish up here. Like, a lot of people are saying Pluto and Aquarius, and now we have Neptune and Aries. That the last time these things were in these placements was the French and American Revolution or the Civil War, the American Civil War. Um, and I just kind of feel intuitively like it does feel like war is in the air, I don't need astrology to tell me that, but do you have any sensitivity to astrology, or do you just kind of you described yourself as being in a peaceful place, so maybe astrology isn't something that you hang your hat on, but
Yeah, well, first of all, we're definitely in a war. I mean, we basically have lost a massive battle, or maybe a war itself, to Russia.
yep,
That we didn't even know we were fighting, but they knew
yep,
we were fighting, and they identified us as their enemy,
yep,
and then they used what's called Russian political technology over decades in a very targeted way. With the assistance of other kind of like transnational, gangster oligarchs like Rupert Murdoch and so on, to basically exploit fissures in our belief systems, kind of like the inherent problems of living in an open, liberal society, to basically lead us to total self-destruction and fragmentation, which they did like incredibly effectively. It's like an amazing. So yeah, we basically have already lost we've certainly lost a major battle. If we can rally and not totally lose the war is still in question, but it's really, it's obviously that's happening, extremely clever, cunning, because it was a war that didn't require them like, physically attacking us. They did it through
mind
the media world, the mind world, yeah, mind control.
consciousness.
So yeah, I mean astrology. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Richard Tarnas's book Cosmos and Psyche. That was for me like the key in to astrology. So he talks about the outer planet transits and how they structure kind of like larger patterns in human
Yep,
civilization.
yep,
Yeah, I mean that's to me it would seem very convincing. Yeah, I mean Pluto, what is it, Pluto Uranus or something now? Like, yeah, whatever. It's like we, Pluto return, the US is in its Pluto return, so everything is like smashing apart, blowing up,
yep,
all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's obviously it always works better as a descriptive ter rather than a predictive thing, because then you always see in retrospect all these astrologers who think they're so clever are like trying to predict these things, and they like change their predictions after they happen, and they're like, oh, like I don't know. So yeah, I think it's very hard to sort of hold it together as a useful predictive tool, but it's a useful vector in its way, but people get obviously too attached to it. And Yeah, there's a lot of little planets out there that also impact, and but and it's from an idealist perspective, why not? Like, why wouldn't these other planets be kind of like energetic signatures or like resonant frequencies that are, helping to create a sort of meshwork of planetary consciousness or something. It doesn't seem like far-fetched to me at all.
I don't know if you're familiar with Andrew Bustamante. He's like a ex-CIA agent. He does a lot of podcasts with folks. Kind of like there's a lot of guys out there who have podcasts, like Lex Friedman and so forth. And he's just been, it seems like he's almost like on a tour, but he has like a spy company that he runs now, but he's an ex-CIA um, spy. And Andrew Bustamante dropped some interesting information where he said he was moving his family out of the country by 2026, like early 2026, seeming to allude like the United States is going to be an unsafe place to be. And some might argue there may be no safe place to be. Do you know what I mean? This may be a global phenomenon that we're going to face. And some could argue that he's just controlled opposition and spreading fear. But do you have any thoughts on like if you had the money or the resources, like leave the United States before things get really bad? Or
Yeah, I'm actually working on getting a residency visa in Portugal right now.
there you go. There you
Um,
go.
yeah, because I know enough of my history to know that when you have fascist regimes, they just they don't really like independent gadfly thinkers.
Yeah.
And some of my greatest heroes ended up not making it through the whole Nazi thing. So
Yeah.
um,
So it sounds like you're taking
yeah,
it seriously.
yeah, of course I'm taking it seriously. I mean, it's also I also don't really feel like I really love New York City. Like I just went to all these incredible cultural events here. I have like a deep history and friendship and lineages and so on. It's not going to be the same in like Lisbon or even like Paris or something. But I don't really feel like giving my energy to this thing. It's like I told everybody this was like a really bad idea. I mean, it's like, what am I supposed to do? Like, you know, pay taxes to, support Trump and his horrible ideas and his horrible friends. I mean, this is like, yeah, it's going to become like North Korea here. It looks
No,
like.
it's fascinating that you say that. I recently helped do the first ibogaine town hall in New York City. I've been partnering with some plant medicine activists in New York City that are working on the cannabis museum and doing like a cannabis TV show. I'm trying to be their like MC and stuff. But it's interesting that you mentioned this push and pull for you, where part of your heart isn't really that invested in giving more to like a dying nation. I mean, it seems to me that's what you're saying is that putting your energy into this country that is paying taxes to fascists and getting ready for a kind of a fascist dictatorship is what you're seeing from a historical lens. I'm just relating to that in terms of as a woman, I've had, and it's not that I don't, everything you were saying about men, I feel like we have a war on men that's very unique and we aren't willing to examine it. And I think it's part of feminism. But as a woman, there aren't a lot of women psychedelic political leaders. And so a lot of these meetings I attend, it's like men, lots of men. Um, but my point is that after I did the town hall in New York City, Brian Hubbard that we featured, he went on to do Joe Rogan, right? And you might not be crying tears about not doing Joe Rogan, right? But I've been trying for years to get on Joe Rogan. So it just for me was like another reminder of like I'm helping with all these things, but I'm always kind of in a helper role, like a secretarial role, or I don't know, lifting maybe other people up. But I'm not seeing those same opportunities for women in political leadership in the psychedelic space. There's just like a lot of bros out there. But these are great guys in New York City. However, I kind of feel like I'm pulled to maybe go to Europe or go someplace else. And maybe it's what you're saying, which is sensing that what's coming and what does it mean to abandon your country or abandon your community? I thought your question about what is your community? We're living in these very individualistic stages of development or whatever. We've been kind of isolated through COVID or through whatever, through maybe Russian opposition. But I feel like a lot of people are living with the fears in their head. They're living very isolated lives on TikTok, you know. So, you know.
Yeah, it's also I feel like in theory I might be able to do more for the situation here, not being here.
From
Yeah,
afar.
yeah.
So do you feel like the energy, if you just feel like the vibe of New York City, does it feel less cool than it did when you were a younger man in this environment in terms of like, I understand that art is still alive. I'm an artist, I get it.
No,
But
I think New York is great right now. Like, I mean, honestly, everything's happening here. I mean, yeah, I mean, culture is shifting. I mean,
but
definitely.
do you feel like you're seeing things almost like psychically, like a premonition, like a prophetic dream before others? Like you've kind of, for whatever reason, you're awake, you're alert, or maybe you're special, or that you're seeing where it's all going. Like, do you feel like most people are sleepwalking? You know what I mean? They're not seeing that this is coming.
Yeah, I mean,
If you told an average New Yorker that there could be concentration camps in 5 years, like,
yeah. Um, Yeah, I don't know. I mean, obviously I did a lot of psychedelics and that, in some ways destabilized me, but maybe gave me some insights. I recommend this Christopher Bauch book, LSD in the Mind of the Universe. I don't know if you know
uh-huh,
it, but he did like more high dose LSD sessions than almost anybody. And he began to sort of kind of like find this prophetic or predictive kind of model of the future,
uh-huh.
which involved there being kind of like, yeah, period of like destruction, a lot of people dying, but then these sort of like new communities forming that are more authentic, then sort of mycelial new connections, that becoming like a whole new culture for the future. That actually happening, quite rapidly, like over like several decades or something.
That's
Uh,
wonderful.
yeah.
No, that gives me hope. Cliff High also talks about a dog poet. He calls this person a dog poet in his AI oracle, like a person who rises up out of nowhere, but it's kind of like the voice of the poet. So maybe we'll have a new religion or a new form of consciousness. For me, psychedelics imply that we are all interconnected. And so that's why when we see all this fierce individualism, it doesn't feel authentic to me in terms of what the plant medicine is teaching us. But I also see people that use the psychedelics in ways that seem to exaggerate their mental health issues. And I'm just wondering, are you kind of feeling like you've learned what you've learned from psychedelics and you've moved on, or do you feel like it's something like you still engage with? Or you know what I mean? Some people set it down and they say, "Oh, this was a tool. I really benefited."
I'm
You
gonna
know.
have to I'm gonna have to get off in a minute, by the way. I
Oh,
just have
sure,
to,
sure.
but yeah, I mean, I definitely, tapered off, and I also, began to see that, I became kind of like, um, in late middle age or 40 or whatever, suddenly I was like the Timothy Leary, and everybody wanted to like do drugs with me, and I felt like I was like, you know, like it's almost becomes like an athletic thing, like, and I think I really did injure myself, and it took me stepping back for a long time to, get to a certain state of balance. I don't think I'm ever going to be like the most balanced person in the world, but but I am, interested in going back. Like I haven't done ayahuasca in like, probably like 6 years or something. I really would like to do that again, and I still do some other things, at a lower intensity.
Okay. My last question is, do you feel like people are sometimes unaware, like it's interesting. I knew a shaman in Mexico that had worked with shoot, what's his name? The guy that the Sandy Hook shooting guy. Do you know who I'm talking about? Um he got penalized for saying the Sandy Hook stuff was
Oh, Alex Jones.
Alex Jones, sorry. So this shaman worked with Alex Jones and his family shamanically with different plant medicines and so forth. And so then I thought it was interesting that I think Tucker Carlson and Alex Jones did an interview recently where Alex Jones was saying, "Oh, you shouldn't do psychedelics because people don't even realize, but you're bringing in demons, from the other side and you're opening up portals." And I thought, "Oh, this is interesting," because I had heard through the grapevine that he had had this great healing. I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about, do you worry about those things, or do you lend credence to the idea that people can, open up spiritual portals and bring things in? I'm sure you do. I mean, you've talked about that in your
You
book.
haven't been reading my newsletter apparently, but yeah, I mean I've been writing about that a bunch. I mean, um, yes, I think that totally that happens. I feel like. Even Musk with his ketamine addiction,
Yep.
seems to be like sort of demonically possessed at this point.
Yep.
And yeah, I mean, I wrote about William Owen Thompson's like ideas around like we've eroded the boundary between the psyche and the physical through psychedelic use, unprotected, with a sort of materialist philosophy that doesn't even allow for there to be spirits or demons. This has allowed a lot of like ambiguous entities to sort of cross the thresholds, and they're now like yeah. I mean, I think so. Yeah, yes to all that.
Well, I appreciate that. I recently worked on two bills in Washington state that failed for psychedelics. But it's interesting, everything you're mentioning, it was the focus. It was medical, it was focused on the mental health treatment aspect,
Yeah,
but zero about the spiritual. So, anyway, I want to thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate you, and it would be great to catch up with you when you go to Portugal and see how things go for you there.
we'll see what happens. But thank you so much. Nice to have this chat.
Okay, take care. Have a wonderful day.